to join force with Roma Department of Architecture, where Marco is now teaching, and where Federica is from as well. We had a very, very interesting seminar 2 weeks ago with our colleagues of Urban Species that were discussing new form of participation. Was very, very interesting. So it was mainly about non-discursive form of participation, how to move to this new form of participation by using theoretical, let's say, input from inventive method mainly. That was very, very interesting. The record is actually available only on Teams at the moment. We are kind of looking how we can eventually move this to a larger audience, but we'll discuss it in the coming, let's say, weeks. And this time the idea was to give finally voice to Sareh, that has been a member of our lab since I think 6 months now, that is coming from Melbourne. I was, let's say, researching in the University of Melbourne, and to share some of the, let's say, issue that she has been researching with Marco, that has been in our lab working on water issues since many years now. And so the idea was to question nature-based solution that has been a topic that has been, let's say, very much used into European policy since several years, but which is maybe not always very clear, let's say, what it means exactly. So today we will hear mainly the discussion will start from Marco's and Sareh's inputs. I think we will start mainly with the presentation of Marco and then move to Sareh's presentation. And of course, we will try to keep time for discussion as we did last time, so that we really have time to eventually introduce other, let's say, projects or other tests that have been done around the same issue of, let's say, nature-based solution and its application into question of water management. So I suggest that we move to the presentation, Marco. Yeah, go on.
A technical, just communication. Virginia and Jens, they are looking for the link. Actually,
okay.
To connect.
So there was no link because this is individual events, but what I can do while you start is actually invite them. I will go back, so I suggest you start, and in the meantime, I'm just resolve this technical issues. Okay.
Okay. As Geoffrey said, my name is Marco, and since recently I work in the Department of Architecture, Roma 3. And the title of our presentation, Sareh is actually just here, is Nature-Based Solutions from Design to Designing. The project I'm going to present you, it's something that probably I've been working with in the last years and is connected today knows. But what we're going to try to do is more to trace a trajectory, and in order to address this idea of from design to designing. This project actually is something I conducted as part of a non-profit organization, which is named Latitude, and as a researcher of the Faculty of Architecture at Cambridge of the University of Bruxelles. And so let's say we are first of all we are talking about Brussels. Brussels is located in a very let's say it has a very positive, let's say, geographic position. It's part of the so-called Eurodelta, what the geography calls Eurodelta. So actually in it's positioned on a territory where we find historically decentralized urbanizations, different forms of it. It's, let's say, in a delta because we are in the delta of the Rhine, Meuse, Scheldt rivers, and it counts more than 35 million of inhabitants. Brussels is, let's say, we might say at the core of it, at the core of these important urban situations, and at the crossroad of fundamental mobility routes. And this is one of the reasons why we find there the political institutions of Europe. I'm saying that it's also, though with a lot of contradictions and polarization, it's also a place where there are a lot of wealthy people, and let's say where a project as the one I'm going to present you is probably possible. Brussels is also a city confronting with flood problems. It is a city region, so we see here the perimeter with this dotted line. It's a very small city with 19. I mean, it's made out of 19 municipalities, and what is represented here, though is not probably very visible, are those gray patches, the area where flood could occur. So it means that an extended part of the Brussels territory, it's under the threat of flood. Actually, let me say this area corresponds mainly to the lower parts of Brussels. Brussels is a hilly landscape, a very interesting one, a very pleasant one. At the same time, these hilly conditions is source of many problems because the lower parts of Brussels and these small valleys that used to be the swamp areas, let's say, of this North Europe landscape, of European landscape, now have been urbanized through time. They were initially the place where a number of industries located, but even before merchants and agriculture were there, and then industries and also, let's say, the less wealthy groups started to, let's say, inhabit the areas. So we are talking about water, as probably understood, and over the last decade, let's say, there is a claim for a different way of treating water in the urban landscape. And it is this, at the basis of this paradigm shift, there are a few basic principles. The idea is, okay, let's say buffer, detain rainwater, let's as much as possible store it, reuse it, or recycle it for use. Where to do it? Okay, in parks and public spaces, sometimes it's possible. And there are a lot of projects, not just in Brussels, of course, but even Brussels, that are dealing nowadays with this issue, proposing a number of interesting solutions. What is more, in Brussels, because of this long, let's say, long traditions in participation that is related to the history of the city, we don't have time to go through it, but there are groups of people who actually claim for a different water management. Here we see a group of people a few years ago. They are looking actually for former streams that were crossing the urban landscape of Brussels. They organized these strolls across the landscape in order to reappropriate what was the former landscape of Brussels, in order to claim for a different management, I said, less monopolistic. It's a way to, let's say, somehow also claim for, I mean, it's a formal right to the city, in the sense that they use water to claim for a different way of providing a livable landscape for people in Brussels. Among the issues they try to confront with, there is also the problem of floods. But of course, through time, they used to claim, especially for a different management of the public space, how to integrate water in public space, how to, let's say, retrofit rivers or former rivers, or let's say, build a new hydrography in the public space. I had a chance a few years ago to start a research on decentralization of water, proposing different levels and schemes of decentralization. And one of the obsession I started to deal with was, okay, there are a lot of urban blocks in Brussels. I mean, nobody basically is talking about that. What's the role when we talk about this idea of using water, reducing runoff? And I discussed with colleagues. Catalina probably is also is also with us today, and others. And actually, what appeared a bit, let's say, like capriccio, let's say, actually soon start to make sense, because we are talking about more than 5,000 urban blocks. We might say it's the bulk of the city, of the city region. And we are talking about almost 50% of the surface of Brussels. This is how it looks like in one of the 19 municipalities named Forêt. Thierry, who is connected, is also working on this area. So the municipality is quite sensible to the story of a different way of dealing with water in the urban landscape. We see the lower part, so we see the patch of the part of the OD site, so production site, and a square which is named Saint-Denis, and a park. So let's say we started with this technocratic, if you want, question. What is the role of urban blocks in terms of water management? And we ended up saying, okay, how to convince people to move towards this paradigm shift. So people who are living there, they have their own business, they have their own life. We had the opportunity to build up a project named Ilodo. This was the first move we did. It is framed within a neighborhood contract. We don't go through what it is, but let's say there is this program of 5 years. We did a proposal. When I say we, I think first of all, there was, let's say Ilodo was a research strand of an operation which is bigger and named Chemin Solidaire de l'Eau. It was this non-profit latitude platform, La Cambrota. Then there was another university who collaborated from time to time. The non-profit organization EGEB, those people organizing strolls and claiming for different management of water in Brussels. And a committee was actually people grouped around the idea of claiming for, let's say, stopping with inundations, to stop the inundation in the area. This is very important because it was a group already there, and thanks to the non-profit JAB, we had the chance to work with them. We organized a number of ateliers through 2 years, and we work on 2 urban blocks. One is enclosed, the one here close. Both are close to the square Saint-Denis. As there are many, the enclosed one, and that was interesting for us. The other block was instead open, with a public building, historical building, and a park, and a number of households, let's say, facing the park. We organized ateliers, and I said also that we needed to start to work to challenge also what we meant by design. So this concept of co-design appeared to us something to start to work with. And actually we organized 4 ateliers, I said, +1, but these 4 were about let's say, co-design, co-analysis, but we ended up also in co-construction, small things. I'm not going through all Ilodo. I try to give you just a picture of the main moments, let's say, also that allows us to trace this trajectory I wanted to talk this morning. One of the first action was site visit. Actually, there were more, so we went to the house of other people. They opened their doors, thanks to this Comité Stop Inondation, and we visited their gardens. They showed us the problem they have, and soon we forgot, I say it now, too late, that one of the main concerns was about the basement. They had a lot of problems of humidity. They had to deal with, let's say, electric stuff, pumps, and so on. Key moments were those of co-analysis. We use these moments to, on the one side, to take advantage of the knowledge of people inhabiting the site. So what is named today, called today citizen science. On the other side, it was a way to get everybody at the same point. In this case, for example, we traced, for example, the former streams crossing the area. We looked for the floodable areas. We tried to trace together, okay, how does it work? How does the sewage system work? How my household is connected to it, and so on. And then we moved to co-design phases, where the point was to enable people to express themselves. Of course, I mean, then also we try to banalize is about, let's say, organizing moments properly, to give everybody the words, to give everybody the possibility to express themselves, in this case, fruit stickers. And this design that one evening we did together with some inhabitants who decided to join. And these are the two urban blocks I was referring to. Okay. Now, okay, let's say my computer is blocked, but I hope nobody is sleeping at this point. Okay. Could you hear me, by the way? Can somebody give a signal that you exist?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yes, live.
Very well, Marco.
Right. And you're very enthusiastic, which is nice.
Live.
Okay, I don't know how to solve the problem, but in the meanwhile, I keep talking. Okay, what you will see afterwards, my computer decide to restart. Okay, I move to another presentation. Maybe I have it here. Do you see my screen?
We can see your mouse
Yes.
and the presentation.
Wow.
Yes, we can see the
Okay.
We can even see Fabio on the moment on the screen.
That's beautiful. Okay. Okay, so let's say what happened is that I try to go to a PDF. I'm sure I should have it. Well, no, in PDF are more reliable. Okay, so here we can already resume everything. It's good for who was sleeping. And now we move here. Okay, so another key moment was a collective formation. We did this analysis co-design, but many times then afterwards, the idea also involved students of La Cambra and other universities. Important was to use our skills as architects, urbanists, to represent what was thought and meant during the co-design phases. This is a key moment. I'm saying we were at the Abbey Saturday afternoon. We invited the inhabitants, and they see themselves representing in the models, and they started to say, "Oh, to the neighbors, okay, we live close by. Why don't we jump in this adventure and we go for it?" And this happened actually, fortunately, and we got soon to 3 groups. And now, we named them Collective A, B, C. This is how the ABC are spread, across the 2 urban blocks. So basically, they were really neighbors, and this was the condition to do something in common, to build commonalities. So there are groups of 2 households, group of 4, group of 5. For each of the household, we did an analysis of the socio-technical system. So really looking at, okay, what is your shower, how is it connected to the drinking water network, to the supply network, so toilets. Somebody realized that they had 3 washing machines, and they said, oh my God, I have 3 washing machines, I'm alone. And somebody was, and then many of them had already rainwater tanks. Some of these water tanks was not in function. But okay, that was a way to understand better how the system worked at the level of the household. And then there was this move towards design, again through co-design sessions, several ones. This is about the Collective A. The Collective A, basically, there are 2 friends. The core is this rainwater tank here that stands on the common wall dividing the two properties. We should say kids here play together, so there is a strong connection between the two families. Here, okay, you see another slide. What do you see, guys?
We can see the map with the three collectives, A, B, and C. François and Bernia, Eric and Anne, and we can see your mouse as well. No, we're seeing you.
Okay, which is not good. So I was happily talking without that.
Now it's good.
Okay, do you see me? Okay.
Yeah, we see one building now.
So basically, that's what I showed you before, such technical. Not yet.
You need to stop sharing and share your PDF.
I did it already, but.
Please stop sharing the previous one.
Okay, let's do like this. So don't worry, guys. By 1 o'clock we will finish. Okay. Whew. I was referring to this socio-technical study, let's say. Okay. And then is the project for the collective aid. A common rainwater tank on the wall divided into properties. And then François and Pernilla, they wanted to an inflatable tank to then water their garden. While on the other side, Anne and Rick, they had already a rainwater tank. We wanted to reuse it, and they use it for the flushing toilet and so on, and a rainwater garden. We managed to realize everything through Ilodo, but not the common. So the device that was really working as a common that needs to be managed between the two families. Okay, for the three collectives, actually, this is the one I presented now. We developed a specific project of course. Let me say it was a failure for many terms. For example, here we have the collective aid. It was the most complex one, and here, let's say, the problems affecting these households were so strong that they need answer at a wider level, so municipal level. So soon, when the inhabitants realized that, they decide to take a step back. Concerning the collective C, interesting is the fact that they were very happy to go for it, for this collective system in their gardens. But they said okay, we give the space to the municipality and the region to test what Ilodo means, but we are not going to invest any money in it. So we take already the risk. But no money in Centis came because there were problems in terms of choices at the municipal level. Our communication was probably not enough strong and so on. But we managed to realize something in the front of these households, and we started with. So this is so it presents a bit what we did. So we did the ceiling, and we built up some small flower beds along the facades. We started with 3 households, but while doing the works with students and an enterprise, other inhabitants who are not interested in water, they said, okay, I also want the same. So we ended up with now 9 households along the street. And this is how the small intervention looks like. Of course, in terms of architecture, probably it's not notable. It's not very important either for water, because actually it doesn't perform that much, this system. But it's very meaningful, very symbolic. And actually it's very accessible. So many people can join because it costs 100 euro, 200 euros, according to the plans you decide to go for. So let's say it was, we succeeded, I don't know, we have succeeded. So, but we wanted to insist. We had the chance to participate to another research call, a co-create call, a perfect one for our purpose. And we did it as part of Brousseau, which is a wider project. The name of our initiative is Ilodo le Retour. The idea is to insist on it, to go for it, to not stop talking about it. And obviously, we went back to the collective C and say, let's start again and try to find a solution for it. The entrepreneur who you see here, actually, he was willing to support the project and invest on it in order to again, maybe then later, let's say, maybe see if it was possible to prototyping something. But let's say, though we had many discussions and meetings and so on, the problem was, okay, again, money issue, and then some conflict among people. I mean, we are talking about something that is people-based, is not just about materials, let's say. For the collective B, we wanted to go for this collective tank, and actually we managed. This is how it looks like. Let me say we were happy about that, but also we realized that Eric, Francois, they were friends, their family were very much connected, engaged. One is a philosopher, the other one is a textile designer, and let's say they have the means to pay their own tax, which costs sort of few thousand euros. So let me say, Ilodor Retour is wider than what I presented, and indeed, besides going back to the collectives of Ilodor, it was, let's say, a wider reflection about how can we scale up the initiative of Ilodor to get, let's say, to wider territories involved in the story of Ilodor. And to go shortly, let's say, what appeared something to insist on was the flower bed. Symbolic, okay, but accessible to a lot of probably households. But maybe we went too far, we challenged ourselves too much, because what we did is say, okay, here is where Ilodor, what I shown you before, is located. We moved to this neighborhood. So what we did, we mapped the communities of people, let's say the groups of people, committees, neighbor contracts who were interested in the story of water. And soon we realized that here, this triangle, actually nobody was talking about water here. And it is one of the most, let's say, disadvantaged neighbor of Brussels called Saint-Antoine. It's a very diverse neighbor, but let's say also affected by flood problems. So the point here was, how do we get in contact with these people there? And we did this action, which is we named Cartography 1-to-1. The idea was, okay, let's represent former streams, floodable areas, swamps, on the public space to see whether we have a reaction, and somehow we succeeded. We're not just old people, let's say, involved, though you see in the picture. Okay, and we were, during the market time, we were there and asking, okay, what is the value of water for you? What does it mean in your life? Okay, and what happened is that we discovered that the very link was the basement. What we discovered is that those people living there, they have to actually deal with water on a daily basis. The final result of this is an inquiry named CAVS, which means basement, actually means cellars, okay, about this neighborhood, about those inhabitants, and the daily struggle with humidity, flood, and so on in their basement. It's just a few images. The book is going to publish next week. I mean, printed, and you see how much there is this interaction. They use baskets. Sometimes here you see they also do some plinth in order to avoid flood of their basement. So this is about the credits, more than 100 persons, not counting when bodies were involved. Here's where you find references to the project. I mean, the collection of project I was referring to. I would like just to conclude before leaving the word to Sareh, that indeed we started for a very technical question, and we ended up with a socio-ecological design. We started with the idea of design something, and we ended up in what is called, and what Midrasinovic called design in its book Concurrent Urbanities. And he says about it, that is ways in which design challenge the conventional practice of neoliberal urbanism, facilitated self-expression, and excluded social and civic groups. Probably we didn't go there, but probably what we did is to approach this idea of designing. Thank you. Yes, I stopped sharing.
Geoffrey, just another technical communication. Yes, doesn't manage to do this.
Sorry? Okay, Sareh?
Okay. Geoffrey, did you understand?
Yes,
Okay.
we hear you very well.
No, Jens doesn't manage to join.
I just wrote him actually, and he was, let's say, Teams was telling me that he's not connected actually. So he is invited, but impossible. I did try to invite him, and was telling that he is not connected to Teams.
Okay, should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thanks again, Marco and Geoffrey, both for giving me this opportunity to talk a bit about the research that I've been doing in the last 5 months since I arrived in Brussels. So for those who don't know me, my name is Sareh Moosavi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the ULB, working with Luisa Moretto and the Louise Research Lab. Earlier to here, I lived for 7 years, almost 8 years in Australia, in Melbourne, where I did my PhD, and then I got an academic position for 3 years there in the landscape architecture program. So my background is actually architecture, and then a master and PhD in landscape architecture. And today I'm going to share a work in progress. So this is a really early stages of this research, which is called Design Experimentation for Nature-Based Solutions. And the way that we actually decided to reverse the practice and theory sequence here is after discussions with Marco, we realized that this kind of a relatively theory-heavy presentation will make much more sense if Marco first talks about his kind of practice and some of the issues that he had in creating a very simple and nature-based solution to a simple problem, but the complexity of it and so on. So we decided to use this kind of theoretical framework as a lens to reflect on Marco's practice. So, okay. So just to be upfront with the aim of my research, the aim is to develop a design experimentation framework. And the context that we're looking at is water issues in urban areas. So flooding, including fluvial, and coastal flooding. And I'm interested also in nature-based solutions to these issues, moving away from gray infrastructure. But then how can we then design the nature-based solutions that are resilient to uncertainties of future climatic changes, which we are facing in our urban areas, in our cities? So just to give you a bit of context from which this whole design was born from, obviously there is a big shift, as Marco also mentioned, a paradigm shift from a gray to green infrastructures when it comes to addressing issues of urban flooding. We have come to realization that some of these infrastructures that have been put in place 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago are aging, and they don't have the capacity to deal with some of the future uncertainties of more extreme and more frequent kind of rainfall events and so on. Just to give you an idea, by 2100 we are expecting an increase of more than 30% of precipitation across the northern hemisphere. So the question is really, would these infrastructures that are already in place have the capacity to deal with that change? And if not, are there more adaptive ways that we can use natural processes that are often self-organizing and they have the adaptive capacity to deal with that, these sort of issues, to move away from some of these hard engineering solutions. In parallel to that was a whole shift to kind of consider non-human agents and thinking about the health of our river systems, the health of our waterways. We have, which we have been for long treating them as drains or as sewer systems, and not really thinking about what kind of ends up in these systems and what are the consequences for biodiversity and the flora and fauna that are attached to these water systems. So basically a move away from drain cities to water sensitive cities has been kind of a debate for the last 2 decades, but the ways that we are doing it, they are still sort of new to us, and there are some challenges that we're going to talk about them a bit later. So as I said, we are trying to move away from pipe-based solutions that are often static. They don't have any flexibility to deal with uncertainty and change, towards using natural elements and nature-based elements to deal with these issues. But with this comes the whole challenges of design. How do we design with nature? Because nature inherently is dynamic within itself. So we're working with living organisms, living systems. And on top of that, we have climate change, which is kind of exacerbating this whole dynamism of changing these natural systems, which are highly reliant on hydrodynamic flows, on water flows. So if there is a shift in the hydrological system, obviously these systems will be affected. The debate around that nature-based solutions, as also Geoffrey mentioned, there is a whole debate whether this is a good term, what does it mean exactly? And there's a lot of kind of conversations happening in terms of if we had a better term and what actually nature-based means, basically. And some of these issues or challenges are related to whether we are talking about natural elements or we are talking about some kind of elements that are inspired by nature or based on natural processes. For example, natural infiltration in the soil, which doesn't have any biodiversity impact directly, but it has indirect impacts on the biodiversity. And some of these dilemmas between natural and nature-based comes from the nuances between the two initial definitions that was provided for nature-based solutions. The first one in 2012 by International Union of Conservation of Nature, which broadly defines it as actions to protect, manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems. And then in 2015, another kind of widely used definition from European Commission that explicitly mentions living solutions here. But then it sort of contradicts it with saying that they can be also inspired by nature, so they don't need to be natural themselves. They can be also something that is based on natural processes. So these two kind of the slight nuances between these definitions have been debateful in the community of nature-based solutions, if you like. And some of these questions, for example, are related to whether we consider, for example, pervious surfaces or porous concrete, which is actually highly engineered as a nature-based solution or not, because it's sort of mimicking natural infiltration in the soil. Or let's say let's take rainwater tanks, which also Marco talked about. It's also sort of based on the fact that nature delays the infiltration and it stores the water before releasing it back into the system. So it's trying to mimic a natural water cycle rather than just dumping the water in our drains. But there is nothing natural about a water tank, right? So there isn't no direct impact on biodiversity, but more so an indirect impact and positive influence on biodiversity. And there are also other questions around the questions of innovation. So what are the innovative nature-based solutions? Are they highly technological? Can they not be technological? And how much technology or engineer approaches do we need to create these nature-based solutions? Let's take a green wall, for example. We still have artificial pumping of water that is happening there, so that's nothing natural about it. But then you have the living system, the plants that are highly, dynamic and so on. So it's an integration between engineering and nature-based approaches. And we have sort of come to the sense that we should accept that there is nothing as a pure nature in our cities anymore. And so we need to actually start working with a hybrid system that are integrated with some engineering approaches, but really put to the foreground using nature, more nature in our cities. So despite the fact that the whole science is there about the positive influences of bringing nature to our cities and promoting them for addressing water challenges, surprisingly, the investment to create nature-based solutions remained way below 1% of total investment in water infrastructure, which is kind of a surprising number. But obviously, that means that there is a lot of challenges towards moving away from typical conventional gray infrastructure towards using nature-based solutions. This is based on the United Nations World Water Development Report in 2018. And some of these challenges or barriers to moving towards nature-based solutions is obviously related to the knowledge gaps that we have. So that can be knowledge gaps about how to plan, or policy gaps to accommodate more nature-based solutions. It can be design or the know-how of designing nature-based solutions, and it can be related to implementation and some of the complexities that also came out of Marco's project. And so Cohen and Chatham et al. In 2019, they sort of identified these number of gaps or concepts that are not or weakly emphasized in the principles offered by the IUCN, and those are related to adaptive management, uncertainty, temporal scale, multi-stakeholder participation, and adaptive governance. So these are the areas that are less explored in terms of how to move toward nature-based solutions. And my research so far has highly focused on these sort of gaps. So I was, during my PhD, I was looking at the question of how landscape designers can deal with uncertainty or temporality when they are dealing with flood issues through nature-based solutions. And that's kind of related to more performative ecologies and how we can measure their performance and make sure that they are going to kind of tolerate some extreme events. But in the last couple of years, I have kind of extended my research interest into looking into broader questions, because I have realized there are some more fundamental questions around, okay, we know that nature-based solutions are going to be the answer, but we don't know actually how to, for example, respond to some questions as who is going to take responsibility, who is reliable, where can we actually create them, is it private land, is it public land, so that kind of interface and that challenge there, and also who is going to pay for it. So some broader questions of governance and how we can deal with that as also some of the questions that came out of that, the Ilojo project. So, and I'm also an advocate for design-led planning, and I truly believe that design has the capacity for transformative change in our planning and policy system. So just to give you some idea about the things that I've been previously working at, which looked at performative ecologies, is the way that designers can start thinking about the tools, for example, that engineers use for experimentation and testing performance. These are landscape students in the University of Melbourne, where we took them often to the water lab in the engineering faculty to try to start working with data, basically, or working with phenomena that are kind of like dynamic. So here, for example, the velocity of water, they had to measure some parameters such as rate of infiltration, in the sand tank, where they could actually simulate a rainfall over a scaled down model of a river. And then other, obviously, platforms are there for doing design experimentation when it comes to performance testing. This is, for example, a model of a community that the thesis students of mine was looking into different scenarios of configuration of grow-ins to be able to keep the intrusion of saline water coming into a community where it was highly reliant on fishing, and highly reliant on fresh water, for example. So he was trying to create different configuration of these growings to see which one will perform better. So obviously, digital modeling and simulations can create a lot of kind of quick experimentation in a short time. So they are very effective in that way, but they have some limitations, such as you cannot really model materiality or erosion. For example, there are some cultural and social data which you cannot input into these models to model them. Same with physical prototyping on the left side, for example. And then this project starts to kind of go into those territories of, okay, how can we then make this whole process of designing and design experimentation something that is open to communication, open to co-creation, and so on. So this is an urban climate proofing project by Groundwork in London. It's kind of funded by the EU Life Plus project, so it's a research design collaboration, if you like. And it's a really simple kind of approach to creating rain gardens in the social housing estate. The design itself is not very significant in terms of innovation. It's a very simple kind of linear rain garden or biosphere that is put to capture water through plants. But what is interesting is the approach to experimentation, where these designers and researchers kind of made an in-situ simulation of a 1 to 100-year storm event. Basically, they flooded their own design. And the purpose of this was to check whether it's going to fail or not. So they actually used that sort of dealing with uncertainty by going bravely into testing something that might happen in the future. So they were looking at whether it's going to hold the water or it's going to be flooded in the surrounding environments. They measured the time that the water needed to recede back. So basically, they released 10,000 liters of water in 1 hour to simulate that flood. And obviously, they also wanted to demonstrate this to the community to show them that actually these things can work, because a lot of our kind of the barriers towards nature, moving towards nature-based solutions, the fact that their effectiveness is unknown because they are living systems. With engineering solutions, we have high reliability. To some extent. So this was a way to actually show the community, okay, this is actually working and we need to consider them more. And so there is a kind of like a shift towards moving away from fail-safe approaches to these sort of infrastructures to safe-to-fail kind of approaches. And that means to kind of experiment with these design approaches to kind of test them in a safe-to-fail manner, which means if they fail, they are not going to, highly impact the community or the property around it. It's kind of a simple way of testing, but it kind of the learning from them can be really useful in terms of looping back into the design process for next projects and so on. So I mentioned a lot of the word experimentation, but I haven't really provided a definition yet. And probably I won't be able to pin it down by the end of this postdoc, but it's basically just if we have a quick look at what it means in the dictionary. It comes from the Latin word experire, which means try. So that's kind of like the whole trial and error bits of it. And then the process of trying, obviously, it means that we are looking at something that is unknown without being sure of the outcome. So that's kind of the construct of uncertainty that comes to play. In the Oxford Dictionary, it's kind of like a broader range of experimentation that is kind of defined. So to make a discovery, test a hypothesis, or demonstrate a known fact. And that starts to tell us there's a spectrum of different ways of experimentation, and there's not only one way of doing it. And that's where the whole framework that I'm trying to create tries to kind of bring to the fore. So in theory, it's even harder to pin down the definition of experimentation because it just crosses so many different disciplines, from philosophy and pragmatism and experimentalism. The very simple way that, for example, Schoon defines it, it's an act in order to see what actions lead to. And the question that he kind of brings to the fore is, what if? So basically, we're trying to understand, what if we change something, what would happen next? Some other definitions focus on for example, from a philosopher Peirce, which he focuses on, it has to have that element of revision of the status quo. Some of the definitions come from a literature of ecological reflexity, dealing with uncertainties in the living systems. Research through design provides a lot of interesting kind of overlaps with design experimentation. And there we are talking about evaluating our design at the level of sanity checking. And Krog et al. Has a lot of kind of interesting kind of perspective on design experimentation. And obviously recently in sustainability transition, there are more tending towards inclusive experimentation, promoting innovation through social learning, and dealing with conditions of uncertainty and ambiguity. So as you can see, there's a whole range of different disciplines that are dealing with the issue of experimentation now. And obviously I'm more interested in the design experimentation side of things, but it's really crossing a lot of these theoretical notions here. So to kind of develop this framework, obviously there was no one study that had a comprehensive look at experimentation. There were bits and pieces in each of these that looked at the criteria of experimentation. Hello.
No, we don't hear you so well.
Oh, really?
No.
Is that working now?
No, we could hear it. It was just it was sometimes a bit muffled, but we could hear all the presentation. No worries.
Okay. Cool.
It's the overall quality. There is a lot of echo.
Okay, so okay, I leave the conversation. We use your computer. Let's like this.
Sareh, otherwise you don't have a portable headphone?
Yeah, I do. Let me try that. Yeah, you can. Okay, how is it now?
Much better.
Is it working now?
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay, cool.
Better, yeah.
So as I said, there are bits and pieces of information about criteria, for example, of experimentation, the characteristics that they have, methods of reasoning, tools, actors, procedural logic here and there in the literature, but there is no one comprehensive approach to kind of trying to bring these together, and that's the aim of this research, basically. What happened? Where am I?
You have to shift to the other software.
Okay.
No. You don't have your presentation open?
It was open somewhere.
Maybe you have to reopen it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. I don't know what happened. It just disappeared.
It was probably in the background because we could still see it.
Yeah. Okay. So the really challenging question to pin down is that what are the criteria for defining a design experimentation? As I said, in the literature, there are different criteria that are there, but there is no consensus around them. So we probably all know that they have to have a practical relevance or they are challenge oriented. But for example, when it comes to solution orientation or dealing with uncertainties, there is no actually consensus around whether this is a key criteria of experimentation. So what I thought I would do is, to first of all give us a break, but also get your opinion quickly through a very quick poll. With a question that I'm going to post in the chat, if you can access it. Did you get it?
Yeah.
I think invited people cannot access this chat actually.
Oh.
Sorry.
Maybe can somebody test? Somebody who's invited can see the conversation or not?
No, I can't.
Non, ça marche pas.
No, me neither.
That sucks.
Yeah.
You can maybe do a print screen of the question.
Oh, yeah, indeed. I'll put it share.
What's the URL? Maybe we can just copy and paste paste it in our process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Normally, I have shared the screen where people should be able to see the conversation. Is it working or not? Here is the link. No, nobody's seeing
Just
it.
clear your cameras.
It's so how many actually could access it? It's like, did anyone access it?
What?
Me not.
Wait.
No, it says that the chatting messages are only accessible for team members.
Wait,
But
so
maybe is it a Google-based survey?
No, it's a poll everywhere.
Do you have a URL then? Do you have the address of the poll that you could?
I do. So maybe Geoffrey, you can send it as a private message to those that are not able to.
I try something else.
Otherwise, yeah, you can just put it in the notes of the presentation or in the presentation.
Here is the link.
Perfect.
Oh, cool.
Thanks.
You just have to copy it. I'm sorry, you won't be able probably to copy paste, but you just need to type.
Okay. I'm going to show you the results at the end of the presentation, so I'm going to just carry on.
It went away. We didn't have time.
It went away. We didn't
I
have
will share
time
it again.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, one moment, please.
Yes.
Thanks.
Sorry, but how can we submit the answer?
Yeah, as soon as you just press your answer, it will get submitted. So you don't need to, there's no button for submission.
But there is only one question?
No, you can, it's one question, but you can select multiple options.
Yeah, I think it's better to keep it until everybody has the time to type in. As long as you don't share your screen, Sareh, I think it will stay.
Okay, so should I just switch to my screen now?
Is everybody at the time to go to the poll or to type in?
Yes.
I
Okay.
typed the link.
Okay.
I couldn't access yet.
No.
Wait.
It's working for me.
Okay, I'll just carry on. So we have enough time for discussion. But I'm going to show you the results at the end of our whole presentation. So the framework that actually has, this is a work in progress, the draft framework, I would say, at the moment, is looking at different aims that can underpin an experimentation, different types of inference or reasoning, methods of reasoning that which can be a deductive, inductive, abductive, and those are directly related to the approach that is taken into an experimentation, whether it's reflexive, generative, Darwinian, which is based on the best practice or the most fit would actually be the selected through trial and error. And then a controlled experimentation, as we know, is mostly used in science, is testing a hypothesis, is focused on causality and seeking external validity. And then other constructs that I looked into, lab types, the tools that can be used, the procedural sequence that can happen in an experimentation, the agents that are active in it, and that includes human and non-human agents, obviously. And then at what project stage is the experimentation taken? So this sort of is, the aim is to provide sort of a link for, or a tool for designers, first of all, to reflect back on their project, which is kind of labeled as experimentation, but as well as giving them an opportunity to see what are the pathways or existing kind of ways or approaches to take an experimental approach to design. I won't go into details of each of those constructs, but one of them I think is interesting for us as designers here to look into is coming out of the research literature around research through design, where within an experimentation, there are obviously multiple sub-experimentations or iterations that we go through. So in the case of Marco's project, for example, it was the number of workshops that happen in a certain sequence. But there are obviously different ways of making a conclusion out of those. The first one is accumulative. So that's when an experimentation happens in a layered and stacking up manner, and you just want to deepen your understanding about one particular question. So it's very kind of straightforward, linear. Serial is the same. You're taking a linear path, and the relationship between each neighboring experiment then will inform the next one. Comparative is where you have different experimentation and you change variables there, but then the knowledge that comes out of it is about based on the comparison between the distinctions and then the overlaps of these. Expansive and probing that are mostly used in creative design kind of approaches is so expansive. It's about not deepening our knowledge, but it's actually broadening or expanding our knowledge and discovering new territory. So you might start from a point, but the research question can completely change by the end of the experimentation, and new research questions will appear. Probing has a similar sort of quality. There is no kind of systematic or relationship between experimentation. They can be completely different and focus on different parameters or variables, but as a whole, they would actually help us understand a phenomenon better, or even you can discover some interesting areas that you weren't initially focused on. So obviously the level of creativity might increase. I'm not saying it in an affirmative way, but might increase when you have that a chance to expand your knowledge or kind of get to know and get familiar with newer territories. So the ultimate kind of goal of this research is to be able to operationalize my framework, and by looking into comparative analysis of case studies of existing design or practices that are labeled as experimentation or can be considered as experimentation. But before that, and this is the next stage of this project, I would like to validify my framework through a Delphi study by going through rounds of validifying with expert panels of a maximum 10 people, and those are mostly people that are either writing about experimentation in the literature or they are advocates at experimental design practices. And that can happen in several rounds, but the aim is to get to a near consensus around whether this framework is comprehensive enough, whether the constructs that I have identified are sufficient, and then that I would finalize this framework for the next stage, which is basically making it practical. So in discussions with Marco, we decided actually to use his project as a pilot here to put the lens of this framework over his project to look at some of the constructs that I have identified here. So I created a questionnaire. I actually tested those questions with 4 other colleagues, including Catalina, who provided really constructive feedback on the questions itself. And we had an interesting discussion about the Brussels project as well. So we looked at the Ilodo project, which you just listened to, and we kind of mapped out how some of these constructs worked out in Marco's project. I'm sure he would have some reflections on this, so I would leave it up to him to reflect back on how feeling in those questions made him reflect on his practice, but also what did it reveal. So ideally, this would happen with several projects, and then obviously it becomes interesting when you kind of see some similar patterns coming out of case studies. For example, if you take a reflexive or abductive approach to experimentation, would that help with the level of creativity and innovation coming out of that project? What are the optimized way of taking a particular pathway through experimentation, and so on and so forth. So this is basically at this what I have to say today, and obviously I'm looking forward to getting your feedback because this is a work in progress. But also, if you have any projects that you're working on and you think that it can be framed as a design experimentation, I would like to hear about that project and possibly use them as a case study in my research. So please email me, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your comments on this. And Marco, do you want to reflect on any of the things that we talked about?
I don't know if we have time. Could you hear me? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we hear you.
I want to just say a word very quickly because then there is not time for questions otherwise. It was when Sarah proposed me to feel, I don't know what Catalina, how she experienced it, but she did it as well. But I was saying, oh, what is it? How is it can it be useful? I have to say it helped me to understand better understand the process. We went through questions were really, let's say, short and deep. And also to, I mean, somehow to evaluate some of the steps. For example, one of the questions that struck me was...
Marco, there's a big echo, maybe because your two mic are on.
That's really a political
Much better now. Much better.
Okay. There was an echo apparently.
Okay, that was sort of political question, and I was a bit embarrassed to answer for it because yes, as architect, I'm looking for some results, and you need results when you do research. But at the same time, I mean, is it really somehow extractive? Okay, yeah, that's what I want to share with you. That's it.
Thanks a lot for both presentation. You have something more, Sareh, or can we move to discussion?
Yeah, we can move to discussion.
Great, great. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Very, very interesting and interesting also maybe to switch to have first the application, then the theoretical framework that you suggested, and then the kind of using the let's say the application of Marco as a kind of testing ground for the methodology. Let's see maybe if there are questions. I suggest if everybody can use the hand raise tools that we have in Teams. Might sound a bit maybe let's say academic, but I think it will help you to see who has a question. And of course, it doesn't need to be only question, but also some elements. If you want to go to your poll, of course, we can go through this before we go on to question. But so if anybody has something to share, don't hesitate to raise hand and we'll move to these questions. You want first to go to the poll, Sareh?
Can you see it now?
Yeah,
it's actually live at the moment. So it's sort of interesting to see that not many people thought that it's a solution-oriented, and that was the discussion that we also had with Marco, where some experimentations are not really aimed for coming out, with a clear solution, and they actually end up coming, resulting in more questions than solutions, and that's when we actually the abductive or reflexive practice kind of comes to play. As designers, we are always moving back and forth between testing a hypothesis and informing that hypothesis through our practice and coming up with more questions. So that's really interesting to see that you guys agree with us on that. And
it's still evolving.
Yeah, so there are people that are still responding to it. And so, yeah, leading to innovation as well was a kind of a contested, option there, whether experimentation should necessarily lead to an innovative outcome, or can it be just, testing something, a new methodology, let's say, or a new kind of way of thinking without resulting in innovation. That's also something that is interesting. And then revising the statute code, also you didn't agree with that, Marco. That was interesting as well. And being strategic and purposive. So So we can see that, there is no one way of kind of reflecting on a design experimentation. There are several ways that we can do it and several ways that we can interpret the outcome. So I just wanted to use this to also, for you guys to reflect back on this.
I think it would be interesting to know what is the profession behind all the people who answered. I mean, are they researchers or not? Because, I mean, when you are there and you have to run an office, I believe, and you are not based on research, probably the first one is what you need to go for.
So you expect the practitioner to have answered the first choice?
I'm curious. I mean, I would be curious to know.
That's a good point.
I see your hand raised. Nasrin.
Yes, I'm a practitioner, but I answered with being strategic and purposive. I also wanted to revise the status quo, but I couldn't answer to both. Because solutionism is something that the solutionism narrative was something that brought to a system that was difficult to question in a way. So now also I'm not so much into innovation because we should, I think, also redefine what innovation means. We are studying something natural that already existed in our world, philosophically speaking. So maybe it's like back to the future. I don't know more to say. So, okay.
Thanks for sharing.
Hold my hand. Okay.
Yeah, by the way, Nasrin is going to present something next for the next seminar. Yeah. Thank you, Nasrin.
Indeed, thanks. I see Rohit from who is with us from India has something to share. Please go on, Rohit, if you can hear us.
Not really a question, but a kind of thought to consider when you talk about nature-based solution. I think one of the problems in about looking at ecological and urban kind of cohabitation. One of the problems right now is that we're looking at consumption as a constant. So whenever nature-based solutions, they seem to be inadequate because we are never trying to kind of question the. Here I can tell you that there is a huge difference between the consumption of water, say, in rural India and in urban India. So in rural India, people probably consume less than 50 liters of water per head, maybe even less per day. And in some other places, in the urban, the habits are sometimes 600, 700 liters of water per day. So if we are, if you're thinking about nature-based solutions, there is a kind of unnatural consumption pattern also. If we try to address unnatural consumption with nature-based solution, it might be an impossible ask. That's just a comment I wanted to make. So it's more to do with the where the presentation about looking at nature-based solutions where Sareh's presentation started. Hello.
Yeah. Thanks, Rohit. It was not. The sound is not so clear. But I think Sareh and Marco could get your question. Thanks for sharing.
Hey, I'm not sure I got it. How about you? Can you just say the last? Just re-say the last sentence. Say again.
No, what what I wanted to put across was, when you want to try and see the efficiency of nature-based solutions, there should also be some kind of consideration of what is the consumption habits that you're trying to respond to. Because nature is not able to address any kind of unnatural consumptions. So if we try to evaluate nature-based solution vis-a-vis unnatural consumption patterns, then we may have problems. It will never be sufficient.
It's clear. Yeah. Thanks.
want to go?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we first should look at what is the problem we're trying to address, and if the problem is the magnitude of the problem, obviously is too kind of human induced, or it's kind of impossible for moving away from those gray infrastructure, then those nature-based solutions are not the best answer, obviously. So I think we need to keep our mind open in terms of what context we are looking at, and whether actually natural processes have the capacity to deal with the system or not. And as I mentioned, that there is always a chance of hybridity. So not a purely nature-based solution, but looking at, okay, we have we have to integrate gray infrastructure engineering approaches, but also considering that we need more nature in our cities. So that's the fact that we cannot really avoid, the fact that we need more nature in our cities. And I mean, with this whole pandemic, we have realized that necessity much more often. But I completely agree. It's very context specific, and it's really needs to address the magnitude of those extremities.
I can just, can I add?
Great that Jens could join us. Yeah, sorry for the difficulty. Yeah, Jens.
Yes, I do agree that.
No, just what I wanted to say is that there is a kind of sense of entitlement. I think urban habitants have the sense of entitlement.
Hello?
Yes, we go on, Marco.
Okay. No, I want to say, banalizing a bit, yes, I do agree on the one side we need to go for quantitative studies. That's something, for example, in our project is lacking, though we knew more or less what is the capacity, we knew the capacity of the water tanks and so on. And I'm also with you about the fact that this is about, okay, what does it exactly mean then? How much should we invest to cope with such problem? I'm more interested in the impossibility you were referring to. So I'm saying banalizing because I'm not particularly interested in water. In other words, when I started to work on water, it was something that, okay, there was a need for that. I say might be interesting. I'm not a fetishist of water, let's say. Saying that because, so when I talk about water consumption, yes, I use the water I need. But yesterday night I was washing my face, and I don't know. I started to think about how much water should I use tonight. Maybe I should stop it. I mean, turn on turn off. What I mean is that these inhabitants who were involved, probably they are more aware about what water means and all the problems somehow. And this is exactly about the impossibility you are referring to. And these impossibilities can be addressed only if it is also a human shift and not just a strictly nature technical based solution way, in my opinion.
Maybe if I can continue with the question, or maybe elaborate on the question of Rohit, one other matter that they tackle and that Sareh has addressed is the fact that nature-based solution would, in a way, make the assumption that there would be something natural on which we can say relate to. And Sareh was explaining that the first definitions were actually very much related to this, and then the European Commission kind of took some distance of it, so by because of course we all know that to distinguish natural and artificial is more and more difficult, and I think that what Rohit was saying was also mentioning that. So in the end, is there some kind of change taking place within this paradigm, let's say, where in the end it's more an inspiration maybe from not purely natural system, but or could we even say that in the end it's more the interaction between natural and artificial that is, and the hybridity, as we were mentioning, Sareh, that is let's say the point of focus for inspiration of solution, let's say?
Is that a question?
It's a question.
That's a question, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the whole point of the whole new discussion around nature-based solutions. How can we find innovation at the interface of engineered or artificial approaches and more nature-based or natural approaches? And I think that's the way forward, to think about that integration in a more optimal way, basically.
I think Thierry is burning of a question now that we are raising this question of nature.
No, I'm not burning yet, but sorry, I don't know where is the hand, so I have to do like this, the old school way. Thanks a lot for both presentations. Maybe just a few comments and one main question, because we don't have much time. I was a little bit struck by some terms that you, Sareh, you used while the presentation that may be a bit in contradiction to the last discussion of Geoffrey, where you said there is no pure nature. So I think this debate is kind of 2 decades kind of on the table. So I think we are part of this system that we share. So I think in a definition you use, even the last one, they're still using nature. Which is mentioned, and I think the one of the discussion we may have is in relation to the question of Rohit, is are we tackling the issue at stake with what is the space given for nature and water, NBS, or are we re-questioning the sharing of space on the planet? So I think to broaden a little bit the discussion. In some cases, we've seen prototyping where we actually deconstruct spaces in order to retrocede ground. So I think the NBS is not only, to me, something that has to be implemented within what we have left for the instrumental nature. So I think maybe just to expand the discussion. What I think you said, which is quite important when you talked about the English cases, you said it's not really innovative in terms of design. So what I'm interested is, to my experience, there's not much special innovation in any of the NBS instruments that have been implemented the last decades, 3 decades. And I am interested to know if it is of interest for you to examine in a research new spatial typologies that will emerge from future research or current research. And the second question, I just have 2, is how do you gather, I'm going back to the framework of design or for design. It seems that you collected a series of theoretical framework regarding design, but I think there's a bit of a difference between design, research in design, and research through spatial design. And maybe you could, what is your view on that? Can you just gather let's say the context for research methodology in design as a broad term, or are you focusing or using more specifically what is currently developed in spatial research?
Okay, thanks again. That was really good reflections and really good feedback. Just on your first comment about pure nature, obviously, when we're talking about the city context and urban context, and again, going back to the fact that is there space remain for pure nature in the cities or not? I would say no, but I agree with you that there are ways to create that space. Again, whether it's pure nature or not is a whole different kind of philosophical, the dualism between nature and human, and there's a whole debate that can go on forever, and everyone has their own take on it. The whole idea of the novel ecosystems or constructed ecologies that kind of came to justify these new natures that we're trying to work with in our cities, that's a whole different concept as well. So I would say that with your second question about innovation, yeah, that's exactly what I would like to aim for, to look into projects that are innovative, but not only innovative in the design artifact or the product, but also in their process. So is there anything that has been tried for the first time, for example, in terms of, I don't know, a co-creation process that hasn't been tried, or it's thinking a bit outside of the box with the tools that they are using or methodologies that are using for participation and so on? So innovation doesn't really need to be in the final result of the project, which comes out like in that form or the spatial configuration of a project that is new or kind of unconventional. But also, I'm also interested in innovation in the process itself, so the whole process of designing.
But just to be cynical, is it because you believe that there's no creative approaches that can offer new spaces in the future?
No, I mean,
is it a cynical take, or is it just a focus?
No, I mean, the focus that I'm interested in is mostly the design process itself. But if a design process happens to end in an innovative outcome, that's, the best, out of the two worlds, basically. So if there are projects that are looking into new ways of spatial thinking and design.
I will just say, last word, I will say one issue which is to me then very important if you're interested in focusing on the creativity, innovation in design processes, is how does that speed up the process of implementation? Because there's a real issue of a gap, a time gap between the thinking and actually the transformation of the world. That would be a very interesting input.
That's a really interesting point.
Can I add one little thing about the sort of lack of quality in net-based solutions? Yes, I think there is first a move from engineering. Engineering is kind of reinventing in itself, and so probably there is no design-based, thinking many times in broader terms. And so there is a lack, I think, many times with they are kind of detached from the site where they're implemented, and many times they are very much attached to prototyping and like something that you can just plug in and it's going to work, which is per se a contradiction with the idea of, okay, a site, its ecology in broader terms. And I want to say that because, that's the problem of, and it's also related to time. If you have to plug in, it's there. You plug it in and there is no need to go through a real design process, let's say.
Thanks.
I think Jens had a question. Sorry again for not being able to include you. We've tested, I don't know what was going on technically, but very happy that you're finally here. Go on. Oh, we don't hear you because your microphone is turned off.
Okay. You hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I missed Marco's presentation, but so what I'm saying is mostly relating to what you, Sarah, said. And I maybe that is a little bit off topic, but you mentioned this, I guess, Latour concept of human and non-human. And it just struck me that you use it, maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on it, but it just struck me that now we are talking about an urban context, and maybe the urban is actually in between. So it fits your topic, the human and the non-human. And maybe this slightly dichotomy between the human and the non-human is also where the interesting part of the urban setting is. Maybe even a political aspect that we tend to overlook, and when you deal with the physical part of the city or of the urban. Maybe you could, I don't know.
I think that goes back again to Thierry's question as well, and I mean that's a whole debate within itself. But my focus obviously is in urban areas, and as you mentioned, that's a space between kind of the reflection of a kind of non-human or purely natural, and then kind of the urban ecology, which is kind of some terminologies used, such as constructed ecologies that are constructed by human. And they might still have the benefits of natural systems. They might have biodiversity, high biodiversity benefits, but the fact that they are constructed by humans make it obviously different from somewhere that is untouched by humans. So again, how to deal with that duality in that space is something that is the challenging bit of nature-based solutions in our cities, right? So that whole complexity of, okay, what is considered nature-based, and how much human touch it can have, how much technological contribution should be kind of injected in those solutions or not, to create an effective response to some of these issues. So I think that's a kind of interesting point that is coming out of this whole conversation, to clearly define in what space we are talking about when we want to find nature-based solutions to address some of these challenges that are often human-centric challenges.
Yeah, I guess my point is to maybe challenge this actor network reference, that there are human and non-human. And maybe the in between the non-human and the human is actually what makes the urban, you know. It just struck me when you used this human non-human thing. But I think it also could save us from this old tendency to work in a very, very technocratic and this discussion about technology. And that I know, Marco, you are very interested in the political. And I think that's where maybe the two things merge, that the city has its own dynamics, and just like nature has its dynamics that are very, very complex. And how to connect the urban dynamics, the nature of the urban, and what we could call the bigger nature.
Maybe we could change the term to socio-nature-based solution, no, in the end, to get back.
New terminology.
Yeah.
And I will maybe add that, to me, the context is not the urban. I think it's the planet, because I don't believe in untouched nature. I don't think that you may really spot it. So I think it's. I agree with the in between. It's about what the question to me, which is not yet answered, is we are still deciding for the living organism which are working around us, and I think we didn't so far find a voicing for that. It's only working one way, always. So I think what Latour tried to said when in his first exhibition in Karlsruhe, making things public, was trying. I don't know if you know this project. He tried with scientists to give a voice to a river and make the river speak. And I think maybe it's one of the attempts, at least that I know, that could contribute to this discussion. But I don't know other attempts. So if you have any, I'm interested in that.
I met an artist in New York who was doing something similar. So doing lectures, inviting the public to build the structure of the river by their bodies, using their own bodies, and then discuss how they feel about that. Okay, but in case we can talk about it.
Are there maybe other question or intervention? If is anybody interested to comment on the issue discussed, please turn on your mic and your camera so we can share with some other members, maybe.
Suppose nobody's interested to talk.
Or maybe everybody's asleep, or
I have in case
Okay.
something to say.
Otherwise, Jens, go on, of course.
Yeah, I just thought that we could maybe also talk about. I agree that the planet and is maybe the scale we are talking about, but we could also use the Lefebvrean terminology of socially produced space, and maybe that's maybe we could talk about verbal and non-verbal communication in the urban, and the non-verbal is maybe adding to the political discussion, how to express yourself in this non-verbal way. And one way to do it is, like Marco said, that you actually start to expressing yourself by simply being there, and then of course how you're there is also expressing yourself. But I think this body presence, verbal, non-verbal, could also be interesting in this talk about nature, and maybe the political aspects of these nature-based solutions you are talking about.
That relates very much to the seminar we had 2 weeks ago. So maybe it's good to hear our colleagues from Urban Spaces. I see that Giulietta and Greg have turned on the camera. I also saw at some point Rafaela. So please go on.
Yeah, perhaps. It's a very prevalent question in our research group too. Both the question of human, non-human, the city, whether it's a hybrid space. There's so many things that pop up in my mind now. And on the one hand, I think about voicing non-humans. It's something that is now emergent in the field of HCI, human computing interaction, to find and build interfaces, be they technological, non-technological, be they verbal and non-verbal, as a way to give voice to non-humans and non-human processes, entities, and what have you in the urban realm. That's one. A second thing that I think is about the either or not, the human, non-human. If you look at conservation studies, you have, for example, the Vincent Desprez, the becoming with. You become with other non-human entities. On the other hand, you have Tom van Doren, who talks about extinction studies and conservationists, in which, for example, the becoming with is impossible. Some species do not need or are better off without human intervention. And so I would plead for something in the Barat-like thing, like something quantic, something that is, on the one hand, this and the other. So I think we get stuck in this typical modern thing to purify two states of a similar problem. And then I tend also, in a third part, I tend to agree with Thierry that there is no outside. These other discussions that Bruno Latour has a few steps towards a philosophy of design, where he talks about Peter Sloterdijk and about the outside that we have or not have, and the enfolding of these outsides. Yeah, I don't want to go into discussion, into detail about that, but I do agree. Whether it's forests, forests have been cultivated. It's been now shown that for 10,000s of years humans have influenced this. So this is not even a question of belief. And last week, because you mentioned making things public, last week there was the critical zones, like the new iteration of the exhibition opened, and there was a discussion about volcanoes in the Anthropocene, in which Latour, like a bit wittily challenged the geologists, saying that do volcanoes, are they part of the Anthropocene or not? Of course, Latour knows very well why he does that. He just wants to tease out more about it. But it brings the question to the city: what if geological, the plates we live on are part of the city too? It all depends on what scale you are, and then yeah, it shifts the whole question of human, non-human, hybrid or not. But yeah, just some basic reflections. Yeah, and the last thing is that 2 weeks ago we talked about speculative and or building probes that you let loose in the city, in the public space, that voice almost utterly non-human entities' experience of the same space we have, and to see what this does to us, because this is what E.M. Bogost, which is then O, speculative realism, who are utterly interested in the utterly non-human without human intervention. But he still comes back to the issue of metaphor for us humans to build interfaces that we can try to, voilà, sorry, to take so much time.
Thanks, very interesting. Giulietta, you want to comment also on?
Yeah, I wanted also to just add something. Coming back to the question, but do you hear me well, actually? Yeah, okay. Good. Coming back to the question, more specific question about the voicing. So voicing non-humans, or do they have is their voice heard or unheard, or should we voice, their concerns? Actually, I think it's also a lot a matter of situation, in the sense, of course, in this case, the urban planner is intervening and taking this active position of planning. So it becomes the responsibility of this position, and this action is maybe quite heavy. But generally speaking, I think these the non-human entities completely also have a voice, and they act, and so it's not that as in every dialogue, it's about being able to listen to it, and so being, making ourselves able to and available to listen to these voices and actions and facts and statements, and not necessarily speak in their place, of course. So it's just a small detail to add, and to come back and to connect back to this specific question. But yeah, it's nice to see how it connects back from one session to the other. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Go on, Greg.
Yeah, I just had another reflection about this. In the same discussion between Latour, Desprez, and Coccia, which he's talking about plant-based thinking, and then pulling it into the question of the non-human. He actually did something controversial, like questioning the notion of ecology, because ecology, oikos, is still based on the home, which means that we are still dealing with a very human-centric notion of we are the masters of the home. And then he related it, of course, to the virus that's now the pandemic, and that we still, and he opposed it to the idea of the forest, and the forest is actually the etymologically the residue. That's where we put whatever is not welcome in the home, unless you are orderly, unless you are cleaned up, unless you are, and I think it's it started as a bit of a joke of the putting to question this ecology, which all of us use in one way or another, and then broadening it up. There's a whole question in the Anthropocene. It's not an controversial term. Things of rewilding, or what is actually our role in what non-human agency do we allow actually to intervene with our plans and with our homes?
Can I say something?
Yeah, go on. And then I guess Sareh and Marco want probably to answer the one.
I was just wondering, because now we talk about voicing the non-human, but maybe we could also talk about the non-verbal humans. So, like voting with your feet, you know, that I said it before, but I'm just wanting to make this link between this actual body presence in public spaces and also in this physical design, you know, that you have a chance to politicize by physically just being there. And maybe it also connects at some way to, I think, Greg, you mentioned the quantum theory at some point, that so it's never either or, but and. But also we know in quantum theory that if you start observing what you are testing, you actually influence the test. And that's, I think, is what makes the urban interesting, because you can never be an observer. You are there and things start to change. Yeah.
Can I maybe react again? Actually, yeah, it's true that we spoke about that was it 2 weeks ago, a bit, with this parallel between difficult to reach publics, human publics, and present non-human publics. And actually, I think, although I generally don't like metaphors so much, or I mean, sometimes it's tricky, but it's the idea of a discussion is quite the image, or is quite telling for imagining this kind of exchanges, because it is a discussion which is not only verbal. It is through presence, through gestures, through a lot of aesthetics, through a lot of different registers and elements taking part in it. Of course, we need to first extend the notion of a discussion, but so it becomes an interaction, or probably a transaction, if we really enrich it. So this kind of transactions, then you always need to leave some blank space in order to enable other participants, be there human or non-human, to have their own statements heard and taken into consideration. So I'm also very interested about this, like, non-verbal and these types of these elements which enable us to connect to common, ordinary situations we know, in order to have clues to think and act further in a more in ways that are new, but we always need to somehow connect to something we know. That I think is a bit the struggle we have when we want to go further, voicing non-humans, including think about, okay, ecology is not enough. So we always want to go further and be more ambitious in these kind of reflections, but we also need some hold.
Marco, Sareh, you want to go on? Your mic are off, so you want to go first?
No, I'm interested in the discussion, and let's say, let's stay close to the reality again. Both the project I presented, they were supporting very much the idea of another nature or people appropriating of this kind. I mean, doing something for the ecosystem, let's say, intended as more environment, no? And we started to I mean, somehow we said, okay, maybe there is also room to do some research over there to get some money to explore something. And the interesting part is that now the region who supplied our proposal is asking us to continue to work, but only on the urban blocks, not taking care of the public space. What I mean is that it's funny enough. They say, okay, let's somehow you work on the responsibility of the citizens, let's say. You work with them, let's try to do on that. But we take care of the public space. So we ended up again in a sort of depoliticization of our action. And maybe affecting the work of the committees and associations working out there, let's say, with their bodies, no? It's also interesting about the story of the body, no? What actually you are supposed to implement is within the urban block. It is not anymore in the public space, according to the last discussion we had, okay. Yeah, I wanted to add this.
Sareh, do you want to add something, or?
No, I just thought that this discussion was really fruitful in terms of kind of like stepping back from these projects a bit and really thinking about what we are trying to do here and how are we trying to contribute to a better future for everyone, human, non-human. Like the terminologies are still there, but it's really good to reflect back on some of these terminologies from very different points of views, and I'm really thankful for everyone to sharing their ideas, and obviously it will help to move forwards with a kind of a better understanding of the role that us as designers are playing as agents of change and as agents of promoting a better future for both spaces for nature and spaces for human in our cities. So I think it was really interesting to hear all of you with all the philosophical understandings of these concepts and stepping back again from the project. So thanks again for everyone to have your inputs here. And I don't know if Marco wants to add anything, but are there any other questions, or we're good to move on?
Yeah, I think we can move on. I see that some people have already left, so I suggest to close here before we are only 5 or 6 remaining, discussing all the weekend. So maybe just we can remind our thanks again for all the contribution, very interesting. Maybe reminding our next session that we will have in 2 weeks, except it will be on the Thursday, so the 25th of June, same time, and we will have this time the discussion will be coming mainly from Rome. I think Federica and Nasrin, that will be the main discussants, are still with us. So maybe they can switch on the camera so we have an idea who will be. Thanks.
Hi.
Hi, Nasrin. Hi, Federica. Maybe what I will do also is do a permanent group on Teams, because I think we could share probably more, let's say, even discussion why we are not doing the seminar, and also it will be easier for everybody to join. So I will work on that. So we are all part of this permanent group. And I think it's very interesting. So it would be very interesting to think of follow-up of these really action on the ground based on really methodological fundamental question, let's say, reflecting on the way we can act in the city. And for sure, I'm sure we all, Marco will be very also interested to think about a follow-up session after the session of 25th of June, maybe include some, I think, for example, it would be very interesting to invite our colleague from Parson in New York that worked very much on a similar issue, on really trying to get action on the ground in New York. So that could be also, let's say, interesting opening up, let's say, but anyway, we still have time, and let's go on for our session of 25th and think maybe later on, if you have idea, if some of you have idea for seminar, maybe not in the middle of June, because July, because it will be difficult. We probably will want to do some pause, let's say, but for August, end of August, that would be for sure very, very interesting to continue. Okay, so are there any other elements that some of you want to raise before we close?
I just wanted to thank you, Geoffrey, for.
Oh no, it's thanks to you for preparing.
Sorry. For this whole platform, I think it's a great kind of a way for us to share what we're doing and to get feedback. It can be quite isolating to work from home during this time. So I guess this is a really good way of trying to, stay connected, but as well learn a lot. So the last Louis seminar, I certainly learned a lot from the groups, the urban species group, and I'm hoping that this can go on in a productive way, basically. So thanks again.
Okay, thanks. See you on the 25th then, and thanks again, Sarah and Marco.
Ciao, thank you guys.
Yes, thank you. Bye bye.
A nice weekend. Ciao.
Bye.